So hello friends, my name is Nikhil, and today I'm going to tell you a story which will make you think. So let's start. In the crowded backstreets of Moradabad, survival was treated like a privilege. The city was famous across the world for its brass industry. Millions of dollars worth of handcrafted metalwork left its factories every year. Polished trays, engraved lamps, antique-style decor shipped to Europe, the Middle East, and America. But the workers who created those masterpieces lived very different lives. Most of them were poor, invisible, replaceable. And in one of those forgotten neighborhoods lived a quiet teenage girl named Shabana. People in the area called her Billow, not because she talked too much or chased attention, but because of her sharp eyes, calm, watchful, almost unreadable. She lived with her parents in a tiny two-room house squeezed between welding shops and metalwork shops. During summer, the heat inside became unbearable. During monsoon season, rainwater leaked through the ceiling and flooded the floor. Her father, Salim, worked as a brass engraver. Every morning before sunrise, he sat beneath a weak yellow bulb, carving delicate floral designs into metal plates for exporters who earned fortunes selling them overseas. His hands were permanently scarred from years of labor, yet, despite decades of work, poverty never left the family. Shabana grew up watching that injustice every single day. She watched middlemen cheat workers, local gangsters extort small shop owners, police officers ignore crimes unless money exchanged hands. In Moradabad, power belonged to whoever controlled fear, and Shabana understood that earlier than most people her age. Unlike other girls in the neighborhood, she rarely socialized. She spent most evenings sitting silently outside her father's workshop, studying people as they passed by. The angry customers, the corrupt businessmen, the armed criminals nobody dared confront. Even at 18, Shabana carried herself with unusual emotional control. She spoke softly, but when she looked at someone, it felt like she was memorizing them. Her mother often worried about her. "There's too much anger inside you," she once whispered. Shabana said nothing. But deep down, she already knew something. People like her were never protected by the system. One violent afternoon changed her life forever. Salim's workshop stood near one of the oldest brass markets in the city. It was small, old, and barely profitable, but it was all the family had. That day, several motorcycles stopped outside the shop. Men carrying iron rods stepped off the bikes and blocked both ends of the street. Shopkeepers immediately looked away. Nobody wanted trouble. Because the man leading them was Javed Kalla, a feared local gangster connected to politicians, smugglers, and corrupt police officers. Kalla controlled illegal collections from dozens of workshops across the city. Businesses that refused to pay him usually burned down within weeks. He walked into Salim's shop like he owned it. Without asking permission, he picked up a brass plate from the workbench and examined the engraving. "Nice work," he said coldly. Then he dropped it onto the floor. The plate bent on impact. Salim instantly folded his hands. "Please, don't do this." Kalla smiled. "You've ignored protection payments for months. This shop belongs to us now." His men immediately began throwing tools outside into the street. One worker tried to intervene. He was punched so hard he crashed into the furnace. Salim stepped forward desperately. "Buy, please, this is our only income." Kalla shoved him backward. The old man slammed into a metal table, blood appearing near his forehead. And then, a voice cut through the chaos. "Get away from my father." Everyone turned. Shabana stood at the entrance of the workshop, wearing a simple black salwar suit, her expression completely fearless. Kalla looked amused. "Who's this?" he asked. One of the men laughed. "The old man's daughter." Kalla walked towards her slowly. "You should go home," he said calmly. "This is men's business." Then he grabbed her chin. That was his mistake. Slap. The sound echoed through the market. The entire street froze. Nobody in Moradabad had ever dared strike Javed Kalla in public. Not businessmen, not workers, not even rival criminals. But this 18-year-old girl had just slapped him across the face in front of dozens of witnesses. Kalla's men stared in disbelief. Shopkeepers quietly pulled down their shutters. People began backing away, expecting gunfire at any second. Kala slowly touched his cheek. His eyes turned deadly. "You have no idea what you just did," he whispered. But Shabana didn't move. "If my family suffers," she said coldly, "I'll make sure you suffer first." By sunset, the story had spread across the city. Some called her brave, others called her suicidal, but everyone agreed on one thing. The girl named Billow had publicly humiliated one of Moradabad's most dangerous gangsters. And in cities ruled by fear, humiliation is never forgiven. That night, stones were thrown at her house. The next morning, her father's workshop was vandalized. By the third day, rumors spread that Kala's men were planning to kill Shabana publicly as a warning to others. Her family stopped sleeping. Every sound outside the house felt dangerous. Police refused to help. Some officers were directly connected to Kala's network. Others simply didn't care. That was the moment Shabana finally understood the truth about her city. The law protected the powerful. Everyone else survived on their own. A week later, Shabana disappeared. Neighbors assumed she had fled the city, but the truth was far darker. Late one rainy evening, she arrived at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Moradabad. The building officially stored scrap metal. Unofficially, it served as a meeting point for one of Western Uttar Pradesh's oldest criminal syndicates. It belonged to Rahman Bai. Rahman Bai was not a street thug. He was something much more dangerous. Quiet, patient, strategic. For years, he controlled illegal transport routes, underground gambling operations, extortion networks, and black market brass trading across multiple districts. Even politicians treated him carefully. 2 armed guards stopped Shabana at the entrance. "She wants to meet Rahman Bai," she said calmly. The guards laughed. "Girls don't survive in this world." Shabana looked directly at them. "I'm not here to survive." Inside the warehouse, Rahman Bai sat smoking beside stacks of scrap brass, while several gang members counted cash nearby. The old Don studied Shabana silently as she explained everything. The threats, the attack on her father, the police corruption, the humiliation of Kala. When she finished, Rahman Bai asked only one question. "If I protect you, what do I get in return?" Shabana answered immediately, "Loyalty." The room went silent. Rahman Bai stared at her for several seconds. Then, slowly, he smiled. For the first time in years, he had found someone who wasn't asking for mercy. He had found ambition. From that night forward, Shabana entered the underworld. Rahman Bai trained her personally. She learned how illegal money moved through the brass markets, how politicians secretly funded gang wars, how police officers sold information, how fear could control entire neighborhoods faster than violence ever could. And Shabana learned quickly, too quickly. Unlike most gang members, she never drank, never lost control emotionally, never trusted easily. She observed everything, remembered everyone, and punished betrayal without hesitation. Months later, people in the organization stopped calling her Billow. Now they called her something else. Behenji, a title spoken with both respect and fear. But Shabana understood something many gangsters never did. Guns create power temporarily. Money makes power permanent. So instead of focusing only on street violence, she targeted the real engine of Moradabad, the brass industry itself. Factory owners started receiving anonymous extortion calls. Illegal furnace operators began paying protection money directly to her network. Raw material shipments disappeared unless commissions were paid. Entire sections of the black market brass trade slowly came under her control, and anyone who resisted faced consequences. Warehouse fires, disappearing trucks, brutal public beatings. Within just a few years, Behenji had transformed from a poor craftsman's daughter into one of the most feared rising figures in Moradabad's criminal underworld. And this was only the beginning.
The gunfight lasted less than 7 minutes, but by the time it ended, the balance of power in Moradabad had changed forever. Rain poured across the highway outside the city as bullets ripped through black SUVs near an abandoned warehouse district. Automatic gunfire echoed through the industrial zone, while terrified truck drivers abandoned their vehicles and ran for cover. By midnight, the news had already spread through the underworld. Rahman Bai was dead. Some said he had been betrayed from inside his own organization. Others believed rival gangs had spent months planning the ambush. Nobody knew the full truth, but everyone understood the consequences. Moradabad's most feared crime boss was gone. And whenever a king falls, vultures arrive first. The city's underworld immediately descended into chaos. Gang members disappeared with hidden cash, weapons shipments were stolen, old rivals reclaimed territory overnight. Even men who once swore loyalty to Rahman Bai began negotiating with enemies behind closed doors. Everybody believed the same thing: his empire would collapse within days. And at the center of that collapsing empire stood one woman, Shabana, Behenji. For years, many gangsters had tolerated her because Rahman Bai protected her. Without him, they assumed she would either run or die. They underestimated her badly. 3 nights after Rahman's funeral, senior members of the organization gathered inside an abandoned brass factory on the edge of the city. The atmosphere felt poisonous. Nobody trusted anyone. Armed men stood near broken machinery while arguments erupted across the room. One faction wanted to surrender territory. Another wanted revenge against rival gangs. A few were secretly planning to split the organization entirely. Then, the factory doors opened, and the room fell silent. Behenji walked in alone. No bodyguards, no dramatic entrance, just complete confidence. She wore a plain white suit, her expression unreadable as rainwater dripped from the ceiling around her. One senior gangster finally spoke. "With Rahman Bai gone, this organization needs experienced leadership, not emotions," he said carefully. Another man laughed quietly. "The streets will never accept a woman as boss." Several others nodded. Behenji listened silently. Then she pulled out a pistol. Bang! The bullet tore through the second man's shoulder. His scream echoed through the factory as everyone froze in shock. Smoke slowly rose from Behenji's gun. Her voice remained calm. "And anybody else want to discuss my gender?" Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. At that moment, the power struggle ended. Behenji stepped onto an old metal platform overlooking the factory floor. Rain hammered the roof above her, while armed gangsters stared upward in complete silence. Then she delivered the sentence that would reshape Moradabad's underworld forever. "From tonight, this city answers to me." No cheering followed, no applause, only fear. And in the criminal world, fear was worth more than loyalty. The next morning, 2 rival gang leaders were found hanging beneath a bridge near the brass market. A message had been spray-painted beside the bodies. "Rahman is dead. Behenji is not." The city understood immediately. A new ruler had arrived, and she was far more dangerous than anyone expected. Unlike most gangsters, Behenji didn't rely only on violence. She understood psychology. Fear alone could control people temporarily, but justice, even fake justice, could create devotion. That realization changed everything. Within months, stories began spreading across Moradabad about a secret evening gathering known only as Behenji's Court. Every night, people quietly arrived at hidden locations across the city: abandoned warehouses, old mansions, underground storage buildings. The location changed constantly. Inside, ordinary citizens stood in line waiting to speak directly to Behenji. Poor laborers complained about factory owners refusing wages. Small shopkeepers begged for protection from corrupt police officers, and women came seeking help against abusive husbands and local criminals. And strangely enough, Behenji delivered results. Fast. If a businessman cheated workers, his warehouse mysteriously burned days later. If local thugs terrorized neighborhoods, they disappeared overnight and returned badly beaten. If police officers demanded bribes, videos exposing them leaked anonymously online. Word spread rapidly across the city. The police take money, the courts take years, Behenji takes action. People who once feared her now started respecting her. Some even worshipped her. That was the moment Behenji became more than a gangster. She became a parallel power structure, an underground authority stronger than the official system itself. And the more influence she gained, the more carefully politicians began watching her. Because elections in small cities aren't won through speeches alone. They're won through fear, money, and street control. Behenji understood that perfectly. She realized something important. Gangsters who stay in the shadows eventually get hunted. Gangsters connected to politics become untouchable. That was when she began transforming herself from crime boss into kingmaker. Local municipal elections were approaching in Moradabad. Officially, Behenji stayed away from politics. Unofficially, she controlled half the battlefield. She secretly financed candidates, intimidated rivals into withdrawing, controlled voting patterns in vulnerable neighborhoods. Entire polling stations quietly operated under her influence. Candidates backed by Behenji started winning one after another. Soon, local council members, contractors, and businessmen all depended on her network for survival. Road contracts, market permits, illegal construction approvals, transportation routes, every profitable deal slowly passed through people loyal to Behenji. Politicians who once condemned organized crime now attended private dinners arranged by her associates. Corrupt police officers started working for her. Money flooded into the organization faster than ever before. And for the first time, Moradabad's underworld had something it never had before. A woman sitting at the center of both crime and politics. Her rise became impossible to ignore. Stories about the mysterious female crime boss spread beyond the city and eventually reached the state capital, Lucknow. Intelligence reports described her as highly strategic, politically connected, and extremely dangerous. But one detail alarmed officials more than anything else. Large sections of the public trusted Behenji more than the government. That made her a threat far beyond organized crime. A closed-door meeting was held in Lucknow between senior police officers and state authorities. Only one question mattered. Who could stop her? The answer arrived 2 weeks later. A black government SUV entered Moradabad police headquarters early one morning. Officers immediately stood at attention because the man stepping out of the vehicle already had a terrifying reputation across the state. Rator. Rator was known as an encounter specialist, the kind of officer criminals feared even more than prison. Tall, disciplined, emotionless. Unlike most officers, he couldn't be bribed. Rumors claimed he personally led deadly anti-gang operations across multiple districts. Some said once Rator targeted someone, their countdown had already begun. Inside his office, he quietly opened Behenji's case file. Photographs, murder investigations, political links, financial records, witness disappearances, and one image of Behenji walking calmly through a crowded brass market while hundreds watched her in silence. Rator stared at the photo for several seconds. Then he closed the file. "What does she fear?" he asked. Nobody answered, because nobody knew. That same evening, deep inside one of her hidden safe houses, Behenji received the news. Rator has arrived in Moradabad. For the first time in years, even her closest men looked nervous. But Behenji remained completely calm. She slowly lit a cigarette and stared out at the city lights glowing beyond the window. Then, almost smiling, she whispered, "Finally, someone worth fighting."
By the time winter arrived in Moradabad, the city had already split into two sides. On one side stood the law, on the other stood Behenji, and somewhere in between were millions of ordinary people trapped between fear, corruption, and violence. The arrival of Inspector Rator had changed the atmosphere of the city completely. Unlike previous officers, Rator wasn't interested in bribes, political pressure, or negotiations. He operated like a military commander entering enemy territory. Silent raids began across Moradabad. Illegal warehouses were seized overnight. Gun suppliers disappeared. Several lower-level gang members were arrested within weeks. For the first time in years, people started whispering something dangerous. Maybe Behenji can actually be stopped. But Rator knew one thing very clearly. To destroy an empire, you don't attack the queen first. You eliminate the people protecting her. And among all of Behenji's men, one name mattered most: Akram. Akram wasn't just another gangster. He was Behenji's closest enforcer, her shadow, the man responsible for executions, extortion collections, weapons transport, and internal discipline inside the organization. If Behenji was the brain of the empire, Akram was its violence. Tall, heavily built, and feared across western Uttar Pradesh, Akram had survived multiple gang wars and police raids over the years. Rumors claimed he personally carried out more than 20 killings for the syndicate. Even rival gangs avoided speaking his name carelessly. Rator made him the first target. The operation began after weeks of surveillance. Police tracked Akram's movements through intercepted phone calls and informants hidden inside transport networks. Late one evening, intelligence reports suggested Akram would be traveling through an industrial route outside of Moradabad with only 2 vehicles for protection. Rator moved immediately. No press, no warnings, just action. Near an abandoned toll road outside of Moradabad, police vehicles blocked the convoy from both sides. Floodlights exploded across the darkness. Officers surrounded the SUVs with rifles raised. "Akram!" Rator shouted. "Surrender!" For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through police shields as Akram's men fired wildly from inside the vehicles. Officers took cover behind barricades while sparks flew across the highway. The encounter lasted less than 4 minutes. By the sunrise, news channels across the state were broadcasting the story. Behenji's right-hand man killed in police encounter. Moradabad exploded with tension. Markets shut down early. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some celebrated Akram's death. Others feared what would happen next. Because everyone understood one thing: Behenji would never let this go unanswered. Inside her heavily guarded safe house, silence filled the room as Akram's body lay covered in white cloth. Gang members stood with lowered heads. Nobody dared speak. Behenji walked slowly toward the body and uncovered his face. For several seconds, she said nothing. No tears, no emotional breakdown, only rage burning quietly behind her eyes. Akram had been with her since the early days. He had fought beside her during gang wars, political battles, and police crackdowns. More importantly, he had been absolutely loyal, and loyalty was rare in her world. Finally, Behenji spoke. "Rator wants war," she said softly. The room remained silent. Then she looked up. "Now he gets one." That night, her network of informants spread across the city like a virus. Tea vendors, truck drivers, corrupt constables, street gamblers, mechanics, even small-time criminals secretly worked as eyes and ears for Behenji's organization. Nobody knew who was feeding her information anymore. That was what made her dangerous. She didn't just control gangsters, she controlled information. 3 days later, Inspector Rator received an urgent intelligence report. A large illegal weapons deal was supposedly taking place at a warehouse near Moradabad's outer industrial zone. According to the tip, Behenji herself would be present. For Rator, it looked like the opportunity he had been waiting for. He assembled a heavily armed police team immediately. Multiple SUVs moved toward the warehouse after midnight, with headlights turned off. The roads were empty. The atmosphere felt wrong. But by the time Rator realized it, it was already too late. The moment police vehicles entered the warehouse perimeter, gunfire erupted from every direction.
By the time winter arrived in Moradabad, the city had already split into 2 sides. On one side stood the law. On the other stood Behenji. And somewhere in between were millions of ordinary people trapped between fear, corruption, and violence. The arrival of Inspector Rator had changed the atmosphere of the city completely. Unlike previous officers, Rator wasn't interested in bribes, political pressure, or negotiations. He operated like a military commander entering enemy territory. Silent raids began across Moradabad. Illegal warehouses were seized overnight. Gun suppliers disappeared. Several lower-level gang members were arrested within weeks. For the first time in years, people started whispering something dangerous. Maybe Behenji can actually be stopped. But Rator knew one thing very clearly. To destroy an empire, you don't attack the queen first. You eliminate the people protecting her. And among all of Behenji's men, one name mattered most: Akram. Akram wasn't just another gangster. He was Behenji's closest enforcer, her shadow, the man responsible for executions, extortion collections, weapons transport, and internal discipline inside the organization. If Behenji was the brain of the empire, Akram was its violence. Tall, heavily built, and feared across western Uttar Pradesh, Akram had survived multiple gang wars and police raids over the years. Rumors claimed he personally carried out more than 20 killings for the syndicate. Even rival gangs avoided speaking his name carelessly. Rator made him the first target. The operation began after weeks of surveillance. Police tracked Akram's movements through intercepted phone calls and informants hidden inside transport networks. Late one evening, intelligence reports suggested Akram would be traveling through an industrial route outside of Moradabad with only 2 vehicles for protection. Rator moved immediately. No press, no warnings, just action. Near an abandoned toll road outside of Moradabad, police vehicles blocked the convoy from both sides. Floodlights exploded across the darkness. Officers surrounded the SUVs with rifles raised. "Akram!" Rator shouted. "Surrender!" For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through police shields as Akram's men fired wildly from inside the vehicles. Officers took cover behind barricades while sparks flew across the highway. The encounter lasted less than 4 minutes. By the sunrise, news channels across the state were broadcasting the story. Behenji's right-hand man killed in police encounter. Moradabad exploded with tension. Markets shut down early. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some celebrated Akram's death. Others feared what would happen next. Because everyone understood one thing: Behenji would never let this go unanswered. Inside her heavily guarded safe house, silence filled the room as Akram's body lay covered in white cloth. Gang members stood with lowered heads. Nobody dared speak. Behenji walked slowly toward the body and uncovered his face. For several seconds, she said nothing. No tears, no emotional breakdown, only rage burning quietly behind her eyes. Akram had been with her since the early days. He had fought beside her during gang wars, political battles, and police crackdowns. More importantly, he had been absolutely loyal, and loyalty was rare in her world. Finally, Behenji spoke. "Rator wants war," she said softly. The room remained silent. Then she looked up. "Now he gets one." That night, her network of informants spread across the city like a virus. Tea vendors, truck drivers, corrupt constables, street gamblers, mechanics, even small-time criminals secretly worked as eyes and ears for Behenji's organization. Nobody knew who was feeding her information anymore. That was what made her dangerous. She didn't just control gangsters, she controlled information. 3 days later, Inspector Rator received an urgent intelligence report. A large illegal weapons deal was supposedly taking place at a warehouse near Moradabad's outer industrial zone. According to the tip, Behenji herself would be present. For Rator, it looked like the opportunity he had been waiting for. He assembled a heavily armed police team immediately. Multiple SUVs moved toward the warehouse after midnight, with headlights turned off. The roads were empty. The atmosphere felt wrong. But by the time Rator realized it, it was already too late. The moment police vehicles entered the warehouse perimeter, gunfire erupted from every direction. Bullets shattered windshields instantly. Officers dove behind vehicles as automatic gunfire rained down from rooftops, container ships, and unfinished buildings surrounding the area. "It's an ambush!" someone screamed. Chaos exploded across the industrial yard. Police officers fired blindly into the darkness, while attackers shifted positions constantly.
Then, through the smoke and flashing muzzle fire, Rathor saw her. Behenji, standing openly on top of a steel platform overlooking the battlefield. She held an INSAS rifle in her hands with complete control, firing calmly while explosions echoed around the compound. For a brief moment, their eyes locked across the chaos. Neither looked away. Bullets sparked around Rathor as officers desperately tried to retreat. Several policemen were injured. 2 vehicles caught fire. Communication units stopped working after snipers targeted equipment first. The police team had walked directly into a perfectly planned kill zone, and Behenji had designed every second of it. After nearly 20 minutes of non-stop gunfire, finally, Rathor ordered tactical withdrawal. Their surviving police vehicles reversed out of the area under heavy fire, while gang members disappeared into the darkness before reinforcements could arrive. By morning, the entire city was talking about only one thing. Inspector Rathor had been forced to retreat. For the first time since his arrival, the legendary encounter specialist had lost publicly. And in the criminal world, perception mattered as much as reality. To many people in Moradabad, the failed operation proved something terrifying. The law entered the city with permission, but Behenji ruled it. Her influence grew even larger after the ambush. Young criminals started idolizing her. Politicians secretly reopened communication with her network. Even some police officers became hesitant during operations connected to her organization. But while Behenji focused on Rathor, another enemy was already watching from the shadows, a far older enemy. For decades, Moradabad's illegal gambling markets and land mafia had been controlled by one man, Thakur Sahab. Unlike Behenji, Thakur came from old money and political bloodlines. He controlled real estate scams, illegal land grabs, betting networks, and private armed groups across multiple districts. Where Behenji built power through fear and strategy, Thakur ruled through legacy. And he hated what she represented. A woman rising faster than men who spent decades building criminal empires. At first, he ignored her. Then he mocked her. But after Rathor's failed raid, something changed. Thakur Sahab realized Behenji was no longer a local gangster. She was becoming a national-level threat. And if her influence continued growing, she would eventually move into businesses he considered his own. That could not be allowed. One evening, inside his heavily guarded farmhouse, Thakur Sahab quietly listened as his men discussed Behenji's expanding network. Then he crushed a cigarette into the table and spoke only one sentence. "Before the police kill her, we will." And just like that, Moradabad was pushed toward a 3-way war. The police, Behenji's syndicate, and Thakur Sahab's empire. The city had survived gang violence before, but never like this, because now everyone wanted the throne.
War doesn't arrive all at once. First, the city hears rumors. Then come the bodies, and finally, the silence. That winter, Moradabad stopped feeling like a functioning city and started looking like occupied territory. The conflict between Thakur Sahab and Behenji had exploded into open warfare. No more secret assassinations, no more hidden threats. Now the violence was public, relentless, uncontrollable. Gunfights erupted in crowded markets. Vehicles carrying gang members were ambushed in broad daylight. Illegal gambling dens burned overnight. Construction contractors disappeared. Every morning brought fresh news of another killing. Within a single week, nearly a dozen people from both sides were dead. Some were gangsters, some were informants, some were simply unlucky enough to be standing nearby. Fear spread across Moradabad faster than the violence itself. Markets closed before sunset. Parents stopped sending children outside after dark. Even factory owners began shutting operations early. For decades, the city had lived to the sound of hammering brass and roaring furnaces. Now, those sounds were drowned beneath sirens and gunfire. At night, entire neighborhoods went silent. People locked their doors and prayed the shootings stayed far away from their homes. Unofficially, the city was under curfew. Officially, nobody controlled it anymore. not the police, not the politicians, not even the gangs. And in the middle of that chaos, Behenji was fighting enemies from every direction. Inspector Rator continued targeting her network aggressively after the warehouse ambush humiliated his task force. At the same time, Thakur Sahab's shooters were hunting her people street by street. Behenji barely slept anymore. Every safe house felt compromised. Every phone call felt dangerous. Every meeting carried the risk of betrayal. Still, despite the pressure, her organization continued surviving for one reason: loyalty. Or at least, what she believed was loyalty. Among the few men Behenji trusted completely, one stood above the rest: Jaga. Jaga had been part of the organization since the early days of Ramanbai's empire. Loud, aggressive, and feared in the streets, Jaga had fought beside Behenji during gang wars, election violence, and police raids. He knew her routines, her hideouts, her emergency escape routes. More importantly, he knew how much she trusted him. That made him dangerous. What nobody realized was that Jaga had already begun changing. The war was becoming expensive. Weapons, bribes, medical expenses, political protection, everything required money. And Thakur Sahab had plenty of it. According to rumors, Jaga was secretly approached through middlemen connected to Thakur's network. At first, he refused, but greed is patient and fear is persuasive. Soon, the offers became larger: cash, land, protection, a guaranteed escape from the war before Behenji's empire collapsed. Then came the final temptation: power. Thakur Sahab promised Jaga something nobody else ever had. If Behenji falls, the message said, you won't be a soldier, you'll rule what remains. That was enough. The betrayal began quietly. Small pieces of information first: movement patterns, vehicle changes, meeting schedules. Then something far more dangerous: safe house locations. Meanwhile, Rator's intelligence network suddenly started receiving unusually accurate information about Behenji's operations. Too accurate. He immediately understood what it meant. There's a leak inside her circle, he told his officers. But even Rator didn't know how deep the betrayal actually went. 3 nights later, Moradabad was hit by a violent storm. Heavy rain flooded roads across the city, while strong winds knocked out electricity in several neighborhoods. Perfect conditions for an attack.
That same night, Behenji was hiding inside a secluded farmhouse near the banks of the Ramganga River. The property belonged to an old political ally who'd secretly sheltered her network multiple times before. It was supposed to be one of her safest locations. Only a handful of people knew about it. One of them was Jaga. Inside the farmhouse, tension filled the air. Several loyal gunmen guarded the perimeter, while Behenji studied maps and police movement reports under dim emergency lights. The war had already cost her too much, too many men, too many allies, and somewhere deep inside, she could feel the walls closing around her. Then the lights outside disappeared. One guard rushed inside, panicked. "Madam, something's wrong." Before anyone could react, gunfire exploded across the farmhouse. Bullets shattered windows instantly. Glass sprayed across the walls, while automatic rifles tore through doors and furniture from multiple directions. The attack was perfectly coordinated. Too perfect. Behenji immediately understood the truth. Someone had betrayed her. Outside, dozens of armed men moved through the rain surrounding the farmhouse from every side. Some belonged to Thakur Sahab's private shooters. Others were police tactical units led by Rathor. For the first time, both enemies had arrived together. Every escape route was already blocked. Vehicles near the back entrance were burning. Snipers had taken positions near the riverside. The farmhouse had become a death trap. Inside, chaos erupted. Behenji's remaining loyalists returned fire desperately while bullets ripped through walls around them. One gunman was shot through the neck near the staircase. Another collapsed beside the kitchen doorway seconds later. The storm outside mixed with the sound of non-stop gunfire, creating pure madness. "Move to the rear exit," someone shouted. But the rear exit was already compromised. More gunfire erupted there immediately. Behenji grabbed an assault rifle and took position behind a broken wall inside the main hall. Her face remained calm despite the chaos.
Years in the underworld had trained her for moments exactly like this. Through shattered windows, she could see armed silhouettes moving through the rain toward the farmhouse. Then, she spotted one figure directing shooters near the outer gate. Takor Sahab's lead marksman, the same man responsible for multiple assassinations during the war. Behenji steadied her breathing, waited, and fired. The burst of bullets tore directly through the shooter's chest. He collapsed instantly into the mud. Several attackers ducked for cover in shock. Inside the farmhouse, her remaining men shouted in renewed confidence, but victory lasted only seconds. As Behenji moved toward another firing position, bang! A bullet slammed into her side. She staggered but stayed standing. Then another shot hit her shoulder moments later. Pain exploded through her body. Blood quickly spread across her white clothing. Still, she refused to fall. Outside, the attackers kept advancing through the storm. Inside, her remaining men were dying one by one. The farmhouse echoed with screaming, gunfire, and breaking wood, while lightning illuminated the battlefield in terrifying flashes. And somewhere beyond the chaos, one question remained unanswered. Who would reach her first, Rathor or death? Rain hammered the farmhouse like gunfire from the sky itself. Inside, the air smelled of blood, smoke, and wet concrete. Bodies covered the floor. Broken glass crunched beneath boots. And somewhere between the chaos and the screaming, Behenji realized the war was over. Not because she had lost, but because someone close to her had sold her out. Wounded and bleeding heavily, she leaned against a shattered wall while bullets ripped through the rooms around her. Blood dripped steadily from her side onto the floorboards beneath her feet. Most people would have panicked. Behenji became quieter, more focused. Years in the underworld had taught her one final rule. When death gets close, the truth reveals itself. And at that moment, there was only one face she wanted to see. Jaga. Jaga, the man she had trusted for years, the man who knew every safe house, every escape route, every weakness. Through the shattered windows of the farmhouse, flashes of gunfire illuminated the storm outside in violent bursts of light. Then she saw him, near the outer barricades, moving behind police units, trying to disappear into the confusion while the firefight continued around him. Not fighting, not helping, running. For a brief second, everything inside Behenji went completely silent. The betrayal hurt more than the bullets. Behenji slowly lifted her rifle, despite the pain tearing through her body. Her breathing became shallow. Blood covered her hands. Across the battlefield, Jaga began moving toward an armored police vehicle, using officers and smoke as cover. Lightning flashed across the riverbank, and in that single white burst of light, Behenji pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the storm. Jaga froze mid-step, then collapsed face first into the mud, dead before he hit the ground. For several seconds, nobody understood what had happened. Then panic spread among the shooters near the barricade. "The traitor's down! Jaga's dead!" Even in her final moments, Behenji had delivered punishment personally. Inside the farmhouse, her remaining loyalists were almost gone. Outside, police units led by Inspector Rathor continued closing in from multiple sides. The operation was nearly over. But Rathor knew one thing about Behenji. People like her rarely surrendered. Gunfire slowly faded as officers advanced through the ruined farmhouse, room by room. Bodies lay everywhere. The storm had flooded parts of the property near the riverbank. Furniture burned in scattered corners, while shattered lights flickered through the darkness. Then an officer shouted, "She's moving toward the river!" Rathor immediately turned. Through the rain and smoke, he saw a figure stumbling toward the banks of the Ram Ganga River. White clothing soaked red with blood, still carrying a rifle, still refusing to stop. "Behenji!" Rathor shouted. "It's over!" She didn't look back. Officers moved closer carefully with weapons raised. The river behind her had become violent from the storm. Dark water crashed against rocks, while powerful currents surged through the night. Another step, then another. Behenji finally stopped near the edge of the riverbank. For a brief moment, everything became strangely quiet. Even the gunfire seemed distant now. Rathor watched her carefully through the rain. After months of war, ambushes, killings, and bloodshed, this was how it ended. The most feared woman in Moradabad, standing alone at the edge of a flooding river, defeated, bleeding, surrounded, but not broken. Rathor lowered his weapon slightly. "Surrender," he said. "You're out of options." Behenji slowly turned toward him. Rainwater mixed with blood across her face, but her expression remained calm, almost fearless. Then she smiled faintly. Not the smile of someone losing, the smile of someone refusing others the ending they wanted. And before anyone could move, she jumped, straight into the raging waters of the Ramganga River. Officers rushed forward instantly. Flashlights swept across the river. Police boats arrived within minutes. Search teams combed the water through the entire night. Divers searched beneath bridges and riverbanks for days afterwards, but nothing was found. No body, no weapon, no trace of Behenji. It was as if the river itself had swallowed her whole. And that's when the rumors began. Some believed she drowned instantly in the current. Others claimed corrupt officers secretly helped her escape. There were whispers that she crossed the border to Nepal, disguised as an old woman. Some even claimed she underwent surgery and started a new life under another identity. Nobody knew the truth. Not the police, not the politicians, not even Rathor. But something strange continued happening across Moradabad in the months after her disappearance. Factory owners still received anonymous extortion notes signed with one name, Behenji. Illegal gambling operators continued paying protection money out of fear. Local criminals still lowered their voices whenever her name was mentioned, and every now and then somebody would swear they had seen her. A woman in white stepping out of a black SUV late at night, a shadow watching from the old brass markets, a mysterious caller giving orders nobody dared ignore. The legend refused to die. Years passed, new gangsters rose, new politicians took power, new police officers promised to clean the city, but Moradabad never fully escaped her shadow. Because Behenji had become more than a criminal, she had become folklore. A symbol of fear, rebellion, survival, and power, born from poverty. In the end, nobody could say for certain whether she drowned in the river that night, or whether she simply disappeared into the darkness she once ruled. But even today, in the old brass lanes of Moradabad, older shopkeepers still tell stories about her after sunset, about the quiet girl called Billow, the daughter of a brass engraver, the woman who built an empire in a city ruled by corruption and violence, and the ghost the underworld never managed to bury, the Behenji of Moradabad, a legend still floating through the smoke, rain, and metal dust of the city she once owned.